When we come to the writing task on paper 2, what we find is one writing question split into 2 sections. Each of those sections requires you to write for a different writing triplet. Usually, section A requires you to write to argue, persuade or advise, and section B requires you to write to imagine, explore and entertain. Both sections are compulsory. You must answer both parts, and both parts are worth the same number of marks. They are both worth 12 marks. You have 45 minutes, as you can see, on this question, and in that 45 minutes you have to answer both parts of the question. Because they're worth the same number of marks, you should spend roughly the same amount of time on both parts. So let's turn our attention to part A. So the question here from 2015, from June 2015, was: a magazine has asked its readers to write an article about leadership qualities. Write an article for the magazine giving your thoughts about what makes a good leader. As with all these writing questions, the first thing we need to try to do is to identify the FAP, the form, the audience and the purpose. The form is easy. It's a magazine. Again, do not spend time drawing out columns or colouring in headline banners or drawing pictures. You get no credit for that. You get no marks for that. It is a waste of time. They're only interested in what you actually write and the words that you write and the way that you structure that writing. So a magazine has asked its readers to write an article about leadership qualities, and typically for these sort of questions it's asking you to write an article that gives your thoughts about what makes a good leader. It doesn't tell you specifically who the audience is for this, so you can choose the tone of this, you can choose the formality of this, you can decide who the audience is going to be. Although it doesn't tell you the specific purpose, you can work out that you are being asked to write to argue and to persuade. So it's your thoughts on a particular topic. In this case, it's leadership qualities. What makes a good leader? So you are trying to argue the case that a good leader has certain qualities, and you are trying to persuade your readers to share your view. Now, when they come on to mark this, the examiners will be looking for the conventions that we expect to find in writing to argue, and particularly in writing to persuade, in terms of the language used, the variety of sentences. They will again be marking for spelling, punctuation and grammar. So your spelling needs to be accurate. Any mistakes you do make shouldn't be so bad that they hinder the meaning. If you go to write a word and you're trying to use quite sophisticated vocabulary, but you realise you can't actually spell that word, don't spell it incorrectly. Use perhaps a less sophisticated word that you can spell. You'll get more credit for that than you will for a misspelt sophisticated piece of vocabulary. So if you can't spell it, don't use it. Use something else. Okay. They're also going to look to see if you can use punctuation for effect, and they're going to look to see if you can construct sentences correctly and if you can vary your sentence construction. So they want to see simple, compound and complex sentences being used throughout this. They also want to see that you have understood the FAP, so that you are writing as if it's going to be for a magazine. They don't want it in columns, they don't want pictures, don't do that, but they do want to see that you understand you're writing for a magazine, so a public text. What it says in the mark schemes for these is that weaker answers for the writing questions on paper 2 tend to be brief. They show little or no awareness of the form that they've been asked to write for, and although they might be superficially relevant, there is no development. Okay, so there's no depth to it. They want a developed, a sustained response to this. So the form is a magazine. The audience, you can make that up, you can decide that, and they should be able to tell from the tone that you adopt who you're writing for. And then the purpose is to argue and persuade your readers that a good leader has certain qualities. So that's the first part of the writing question on here. If we turn our attentions now to the second part of the writing question, you can see this is much shorter. Write a short story with the title The Journey. This is an absolutely typical question on here, second part of this question. You're asked to write a short story, a narrative, and you're given either the title or you're given the start of the story which you are expected to write. Now, part B is asking you to write to imagine, to explore and to entertain. And if you're asked to write a short story, you are expected to do all three of those. So you're going to need to use the conventions of all three of those purposes. So you need to be familiar with those. They want a well-structured story. They want it developed. They want development of character, of plot. They want a story that not only captures the reader's attention, but holds it and sustains that attention throughout the text, through varied vocabulary, figurative language, metaphors, similes, appealing to the senses. You can write in any genre you like. Typically they don't say write a horror story or write a comic story. You choose the genre, and if you choose a particular genre, make sure you're familiar enough with it so that you can use the conventions of that genre, and you need to sustain that all the way through. They're looking again at your spelling, your punctuation and grammar, just as they are in every other writing question. You have to answer both parts. Both parts are worth 12 marks, as you can see, and therefore you should spend equal amounts of time on both parts of this question.